Welcome to the latest in the series of questions that have been raised as part of the BEVA BSAVA survey on recruitment and retention. We're lucky enough to have with us Chris Tufnell from the RCVS.
Hello.
Ebony Escalona from VetStago Diversify.
Hello.
Renata Weller from BEVA.
Hi.
And Philip Lemette from the BSAVA.
Hi.
So the question today is in relation to our postgraduate training, and one of the outcomes of the survey was that it was clear that nearly 70% of vets don't have any form of postgraduate qualification. So we really want to dig into that a little bit, and the question that we're raising, are we stuck in a rut with our postgraduate training and education? Philip, what are your thoughts?
I think it's very difficult to say from a single survey. We haven't got any comparisons to years ago. And certainly from my experience of BSAVA certificates, they're oversubscribed, we've got waiting lists on them. So I don't think there's a problem with people not wanting to do certificates. Having said that, there's quite an interesting difference between the equine practitioners and the small animal practitioners. I suspect it's pure speculation, but there's a smaller profession of equine practitioners and they tend to be in more specialist units. So perhaps there's more incentive there to get further qualifications. And with the small animal work, there are a lot more generous GPs who do a lot of CPD, but don't necessarily want to specialise in anything particular and therefore are specialising in being a GP. And I think that's a very important thing because we need really good GPs as well.
Thanks, Philip. Chris, do you think postgraduate qualifications are important?
Yes, I do. I don't. Actually, I'll reword that. So, yes, I think if you feel that it's important to recognise your progression as a veterinary professional, that may well be important to you. And obviously, in various areas, when you're heading into specialisation, that it's very important to you. I think CPD and onward progression is hugely important, and I think if postgraduate qualifications play a part in that and encouraging people to do that, then yes, I do.
And Ebony, were you surprised by that figure that 70% don't have a postgraduate qualification?
First I read it as like I was so surprised initially, but actually, as Philip's alluded to, you can still be getting really valuable training and support without a postgraduate qualification. So I think there's such an incredible plethora of resources and development opportunities, both clinically and non-clinically for the vet profession, that the postgraduate qualification certificates or whatever aren't always the only thing to go to. So I think the question is more important to ask is kind of, well, why do you want to do a postgraduate qualification? Are you doing it because you're disillusioned and you're thinking getting back into education is going to make you have, fuel in your fire again for the profession, which is what I see a lot of? Or are you doing it for something very specific? And is there an end game to that? So is it going to help you with your salary, with your promotions, with your satisfaction at work, with your opportunities in and outside of the clinic?
Thank you. Renata, do you see this as something that needs to be improved?
I'm with Chris and Ebony. One has to look at these data with care. So this doesn't mean people don't do CPD. That it's much more structured. And there is also, as the name implies, there's a certification process behind it, like the BSAVA, like other certificates, like RCVS, and so on. So I guess overall, I personally, as an educator, I would prefer people enrolling in a certificate because it ensures quality control in a way. And I'm not saying that non-certificate CPD is in any way, shape, or form not as good. On the contrary, I think it can be, obviously as valuable as BEVA CPD shows. But if there's a structure behind it, I prefer that. What worries me a little bit, it seems, if you look at the data on CPD allowance, well, first of all, I'm utterly shocked that there are vets out there who don't get any CPD allowance. I think that's not that doesn't reflect well on those practices, I have to say. And also, it seems to be relatively static. The median value seems to be, I mean, years and years and years ago, when I was out in practice, I got 5 days, and that was in the last millennium. So I just think I would quite like to see everybody getting a CPD allowance in terms of money and days off. And it might be nice if the money at least would increase, at least in rate with inflation.
Thanks, Renata. Philip, as you mentioned, the BSAVA CPD and the qualifications are oversubscribed. This BEVA CPD is also fills and has waiting lists regularly. From an employer's perspective, how do you consider candidates with qualifications as opposed to candidates with a full CPD record?
It's useful to have a qualification. It's useful to have letters after your name. Apart from anything else, clients will recognise that as being a degree of expertise, whether that's right or wrong. And I think it's useful to have somebody with a particular expertise in the practice, so you can balance up the different aspects of your practice as well. So you need some surgical aspects and some medical and so on. So it's useful, and I think people appreciate when they have letters after their name that they can hopefully get a higher salary because of that.
And Chris, from your, again as an employer, do you see a significant difference in candidates for your practice with a qualification? I'm talking about a general qualification here rather than a higher level qualification.
So very often I take on recent graduates, and I've had numerous recent graduates that have worked their way through certificates with me. But actually, I've had I'm trying to remember, but I've had very few people who've actually applied to join me who've got an existing certificate. I mean, one of the drums I've banged at the RCVS for a number of years is the lack of uptake on primary care certificates, in that I find it very disappointing. I mean, it's fascinating in this study that the single thing that people seem to dislike most about the profession is clients. And yet the single thing we find it most difficult to do is persuade them of the value of non-clinical skills CPD. And yet those people who then do non-clinical skills CPD really recognise after the event the huge value and the huge difference that's made to developing their abilities as a practitioner. And so I think the direction of CPD and qualifications, and I'm sure it's directed by demand, but I think demand is sort of directed a little bit by the way people are trained and the way that they feel in their first few years in practice. We've failed as a profession to direct people towards developing themselves as a practitioner in the round, and that I find really disappointing, because I would like the most popular certificates, be they whoever provides them, to be the general practice primary care certificates that had an equal weighting of non-clinical to clinical skills, because anybody who's been in practice for any length of time understands the huge value of non-clinical skills in delivering great outcomes.
Renata, you're nodding heartily there.
It's quite interesting. I've spent over the last few months since I started working for CVS, I've spent a lot of time talking to people and just trying to find out what they think they need in terms of learning, education and development. And we find exactly what Chris has said. If you ask somebody who's just graduated last year, they're after clinical CPD. They want opportunities to practice abdominal ultrasound and so on. And then if you ask people who are out a little bit longer, they say, oh, no. Retrospectively, I have to say, the most valuable thing I've ever done was a CPD on communication and resilience and all those soft skills. So there's certainly how long you've been graduated makes a big difference there, and I guess it's a little bit like you know, everybody knows that vegetables are good for you, right? But if I say that to my 12-year-old son, he goes, I'm not eating that carrot. So I hide it. I hide it in something he likes, like burgers. And that's what, well, quite honestly, maybe that's what we need to do to convince those youngsters that it's worthwhile doing. Maybe we need to intermingle it with, because I find this black and white thinking, clinical CPD, non-clinical CPD. Why are we doing this? I would quite like to have more case discussions where obviously you need communication skills. So I think we can. I think we should approach CPD a little bit differently. And yeah, why not? You know, it's all about shades of grey, people.
Mm-hmm.
What many practitioners want to do as CPD and what they ought or need to do as CPD?
I think absolutely there is. Yes, when in my generation we did virtually no soft skills at all, but they do a lot more now. But I think it's something which is so important. We deal all the time with people, and the thing that most new vets find most stressful is dealing with clients. And yet, if you ask them and you look at the survey or what they would do if they didn't want to be vets, it's to go into medicine, where they deal with people all the time. So you can't get away from it. Animals come attached with people. So, you know, we have to learn to deal with people. And I think if we can remove the stress of that by giving people better training in communication skills, then that's got to be a good thing. And it will take a lot of stress off their life in practice.
Ebony, you've got your finger on the pulse. What should we do to narrow that gap between what people think they want and what perhaps others think they ought to have?
Well, I think a lot of you've already covered it. I think the fact that we separate clinical and non-clinical is very odd, but that's difficult. I think another way to kind of structure that those postgraduate. Hang on, my dog! I knew she'd do this.
So, Chris, I'm going to come on to you then.
That I had removed from her is to structure potentially some of that training in CPD a bit differently. We always talk about the individual, but I think it's great actually when we have CPD and trainings, actually it's about the whole team as well. So it's not just about the individual, it's about actually training and supporting the whole team in situ. Lots of providers do that. I work alongside BDS training that do a lot of that, and I think that actually makes a massive difference. The other thing is thinking and changing our mindset about financial value of these CPDs as well. People are very happy to go and spend, you know, a couple of grand on a fracture fixation course, and yet when they look at a new grad program costing the same amount with, I don't know, triple the amount of contact time and hours, they'll say, oh no, I can't afford that. So I think it's also about upskilling and ensuring that the line managers and decision makers, because it's not just the young ones who don't think it's necessary, it's also often at the hands of the financial decision makers as well, just to understand the value that things are not expensive if they are going to help with those, like you said, those soft skills that just are instrumental in helping you become a satisfied and good practitioner. And time again on these forums, when we are asking older practitioners to support younger practitioners in advice, it always comes back to those skills. And if you look at the survey as well, the things that they also like about their jobs are clients. So isn't it brilliant if you can actually enhance all the good parts about your job and also decrease the bad parts, you know, about your job as well?
Absolutely. Chris,
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's aware that the RCVS is focusing and having a good look at outcomes-based CPD, and obviously the outcomes, focusing on outcomes for individual practitioners and what difference the CPD has made to them, rather than just focusing on the input is a good idea. But actually, what I think is really important is to have outcomes-focused CPD. And when I say outcomes-focused, I mean clinical outcomes, but outcomes for the animal and the owner. And if you look at anything in that way, you naturally combine clinical and non-clinical skills, because there's no way that you can deliver great outcomes for animals and owners without combining the two. And I think that's where because we're so input focused and what are we going to get into the individual, we fail to look at what we're trying to deliver and deliver great outcomes. So I think that's a move that we could make, which would maybe focus everybody on the fact that it's combining all these things to make you into a great practitioner.
Thanks, Chris. Renata, is that one of the challenges that we have at BEVA is getting people to attend those non-clinical CPD sessions? From the education perspective, should we be doing more at vet school? And you can say this now because you're not there.
You know what? In all fairness, I think, I mean, I can only speak for the RVC, but the RVC is doing an amazing job incorporating those soft skills into the curriculum. Absolutely. There's a whole professional strand running from year one all the way through, which is there to address exactly that. So I have to, credit where credit is due, and I'm sure other universities do the same. Say, well, the vet schools should do more and the RCVS should do more. But really, it's up to the individual at the end of the day. They're in charge of their own learning destiny. So yes, they might not like carrots, but I still think they should make sure they eat them. Or if they don't like carrots, I mean, they could eat apples, right? It doesn't really matter. So they do need to take charge of their own learning destiny a bit. And I think that's where the whole vet school system falls down a little bit, because it actually has a really relatively rigid timetable. If you compare this to other subjects, there's not much choice. I mean, you have a timetable that starts at Monday morning and stops whenever. So the possibility of choice and taking control of your own learning destiny is relatively limited. So I think that's where vet schools could maybe let people take a little bit or give them more opportunity to show leadership of self.
Philip.
Yes, I agree absolutely, Renata. I think the vet schools are actually doing quite a good job nowadays of integrating soft skills into the course, and it's a fairly crammed course anyway. There is more opportunity now out there with VDS, and BSAVA Congress have a whole day on soft skills on the Sunday, so it is coming out more into the profession for people to access. And if they can realise that actually being able to communicate with clients, because clients actually they're the ones that are treating animals at home. They're the ones that have to make a decision to bring them in. And if you can communicate well with them, then the outcome for the patient is bound to be a lot better.
And Chris, do you think we, as members of the profession, really understand the cost or the value of CPD? If you compare going on a day's marketing CPD, it will cost you twice as much as it will do to go on a day's BEVA or BSAVA CPD. Do you think we get that as a profession, or do you think we don't really, we miss the point?
David, you're going to have to clarify exactly what you were getting at there.
That was a bit of a lost question, wasn't it? I'm sorry. So if a member of the team here wanted to go on a day's marketing CPD, it would cost anywhere between £800 and £1,000, which is a lot more than it would cost to go on a day's clinical veterinary CPD.
Yeah.
Yet we get a lot of complaints about the cost of our CPD. Do we just not understand the comparative values?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think people just don't understand potentially how lucky they are. It's a bit like the RCVS retention fee, really. It's only when you look at what every other profession has to pay that you realise what great value for money you get. So I think that's absolutely true. I think there's a tendency as well, as has been mentioned before, to try and simplify the route in which the CPD is going to be paid for. So to look at some new clinical skill and think, well, I can do 10 of those in the next year and that'll have covered the training to do it, rather than looking at it as part of a professional development plan, really, which just slowly and incrementally grows you into a better and better and better clinician, and therefore better able to deliver great outcomes. So I think you're right. I don't think we do get it on the whole. I think some employers get it. I think, I mean, we have a contracted 5-day CPD allowance, but I've never counted. Everybody's CPD is considered carefully as part of their own individual development and part of the development of the profession and the practice. But and the only thing you have to avoid is when people get very enthusiastic about an area, they really enjoy the CPD in that area and have a tendency to pick CPD that they maybe don't need because they've done quite a lot of training in that area. And so that's just a discussion about people's personal development and how they pick up on areas that they're less strong in. But I think it's, listening to this conversation, I think the biggest thing that single thing that we could do would be stop looking can't get away from the radiator. Stop looking at things separately and start looking at outcomes and thinking, actually, we should be integrating the communication skills required to explain to somebody how to manage a pony with laminitis or a pony with Cushing's. And actually, you're combining the two things, focusing on getting a great outcome. If you just learn how to manage the case clinically and can't communicate to the owner how to manage it on an ongoing basis, you get a rubbish outcome, even if you're clinically brilliant.
Yeah. Anyone like to add any points there? Ebony?
Yeah, I find, going back to the value point of things, I find a lot of vets, and I feel I can say this because I am one of those people that do it, is we see these things like CPD and we see them as a cost and we don't see them as an investment. And like anything that we do to develop ourselves professionally, clinically, non-clinically, is the best investment you will ever make, bar none. Last year, I spent over £5,000 on my development as a vet, and I couldn't afford it, but I also couldn't afford not to do it. So I think we actually do need to just change the way we think about those investments to ourselves. Our money blueprint as a profession is pretty poor. I think we find it hard, that stems from some, practitioners finding it hard to charge, having that conversation about money with owners, having that conversation about money with themselves, negotiating salaries. Our whole financial blueprint as a profession needs to be upped a little bit. That might help us value the right things at the right time for us.
Thank you. Anyone else like to raise any points? Okay, I'm just going to go around you again and say, do you think we are behind the times with CPD? Do you think we need to change in terms of our CPD provision? Renata?
Yes, I think we can be a bit clever.
Philip?
I think it'd be nice to have more sort of structured CPD for individuals in the practice so that they have a CPD program that takes them along a route rather than just taking CPD that they particularly enjoy and choosing from here, there and everywhere. So a structured CPD program for people through their career would be very useful.
Chris?
I think we could be a bit tough on ourselves if we start being overcritical. The provision of CPD now compared to when I qualified is astronomical. I mean, the level of choice and range and breadth there is. We're trying very hard at the RCVS to put students' development records with their records through the professional development phase and then make it a professional development record throughout your professional life. And I think that there is an opportunity now for, as Renata said, for people to take responsibility of their own learning journey. And I think the opportunity is probably better now than it's ever been. So I think we've done a really good job. We've still got loads of distance to run, but we're doing well. I think we're doing okay.
Great. And Ebony?
Yeah, I just mean just scaffold and build on where we're at. Like Chris says, there's great stuff there, but structure, get a bit more innovative. Yeah, I think we can do better, but it's certainly not a bad place to be.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.